Dallas just made another move that has half the fan base scratching their heads and the other half straight up furious. And honestly, I don't blame either side right now because what this front office is doing in free agency feels like a puzzle where nobody showed us the box cover. But before we get into all of it, you gotta hit that subscribe button right now. Because here at Blue and Silver Nation, we are on top of every single Cowboys move the moment it happens. We don't wait, we don't delay, we break it all down for you daily. And if you're a real one, you already know that. So tap subscribe and let's get into this, because this one needs to be talked about. The Cowboys have officially signed defensive tackle Ogbonia to a one-year deal reportedly worth around $3 million. Now that number might shift a little bit once the full contract details come out because we see this all the time in free agency where the reported figure ends up being slightly different once you factor in incentives and guarantees versus base salary, but the ballpark is $3 million for one season. And look, I know what you're thinking. Who? That's fair. Unless you're a diehard Chargers fan or someone who obsessively watches every snap of every team's defensive line rotation, you probably don't have strong feelings about this guy one way or the other. But that's exactly why you watch this channel, because we dig into these signings so you don't have to go hunting for film and stats on your own. So, let me tell you exactly who Ogbonia is, and more importantly what this signing actually means for the direction of this defense. Ogbonia comes out of UCLA, and the crazy part is he's the second UCLA defensive tackle on this roster now, which is kind of a funny little coincidence, but hey, maybe somebody in that scouting department has a soft spot for Bruins up front. He was drafted as a late-round pick and has spent time with the Chargers where he was primarily a rotational piece. We're not talking about a guy who was anchoring somebody's defensive line and dominating on a weekly basis. This is a player who in his best stretches was getting maybe 20 to 25 snaps a game, and whose entire value proposition is built around one thing: clogging running lanes. He's a big body in the middle of the trenches who can line up at the 1 technique or slide over to the 3 technique, and his job is to eat up blocks, hold his ground, and make sure running backs can't get to the second level clean. That's his game. That is what he does. And here's what he does not do, because this is important. He is not a pass rusher. Not even close. His pressure rates throughout his career have been minimal, and in his best college season he had something like 8.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks across an entire year. In the NFL, those numbers have been even smaller. We're talking maybe 4 tackles for loss and a sack and a half total across his pro career. So if you're looking at this signing hoping the Cowboys just found some hidden gem who's going to terrorize quarterbacks off the interior, that's not what this is. This is a run stuffer. This is a depth piece. This is someone who the coaching staff can plug in for 15 to 20 snaps a game to keep the defensive line fresh and to make sure they aren't getting gashed between the tackles on early downs. And, to be honest with you, every team needs guys like this. You cannot win in the NFL without a deep defensive line rotation. The problem is not that Dallas signed Ogbonia. The problem is what they haven't done yet. And that's where this whole thing starts to get really frustrating. But let me finish painting the picture on Ogbonia first, because there is some interesting background here. This dude was a track and field athlete in addition to playing football. He did shot put and was actually dominant at it, reportedly winning an under-20 championship in college. That tells you something about his upper body strength and his explosiveness in short bursts. One scouting comparison that floated around draft circles at the time was Daquan Jones. Not a flashy disruptive force, but a guy who could give you some pop at the point of attack with real functional power. He showed some nice things at the Senior Bowl during his draft year, but has never translated that into consistent NFL production. That's the honest truth. He's a backup caliber interior lineman who will likely serve as Kenny Clark's primary backup this season, assuming the depth chart shakes out the way most of us expect. Now let's zoom out, because this is where it gets interesting and honestly a little concerning. The Cowboys restructured Kenny Clark's contract earlier today, which means Clark is locked in and not going anywhere. Solomon Thomas is still under contract, Jay Toya is on the roster. Ogbonia now joins the mix. And then you still have the entire Osa Odigizua situation hanging over everything like a cloud that won't go away. As of right now, the Cowboys have not restructured Osa's deal, and they haven't restructured Quinnen Williams' deal either. And here's the thing. They basically have to adjust at least one of those contracts if they want to have any cap flexibility whatsoever to sign anybody else of substance. That's not speculation, that's just math. The cap is tight and getting tighter with every depth signing they make. So what does Ogbonia's arrival mean for the rest of the defensive line room? Let's walk through it. First, remember that Dallas cut Perry and Winfrey right before free agency started. That was a clear signal that they wanted to upgrade or at least change direction at that spot. And I think it's safe to say the front office views Ogbonia as a better fit than Winfrey for what this defense is trying to do under Mike Zimmer's system. Whether you agree with that evaluation or not is a different conversation, but that's clearly the thinking. Winfrey is gone, Ogbonia is in, and the staff apparently feels more comfortable with what Ogbonia gives them schematically. Now the interesting question becomes what happens with Jay Toya. He's a big body, similar mold in some ways, but there are rumblings that maybe the coaching staff isn't entirely sure he fits the gap-and-a-half responsibilities they're going to be asking their interior linemen to handle. Toya might be a little too big and a little too stiff to execute some of the movement stuff they want, and if that's the case, then Ogbonia might actually leapfrog him on the depth chart despite being a new addition. That's pure speculation on my part, but it's worth watching as we get closer to training camp. And then there's Osa. Man, this is the one everybody wants to talk about, and rightfully so. Let me be real with you. If the Cowboys move on from Osa Odigizua, and there is a real possibility they do within the next 24 to 48 hours based on cap necessity alone, then signing Otito Ogbonia does not replace what you lose. It just doesn't. Ogbonia is not an edge presence. He's not someone you can line up on the outside in a 3-4 look and ask to rush the passer. Osa might have questions around him regarding scheme fit and whether he can produce in a 4-eye front the way this staff wants. Those are legitimate concerns, but his ceiling and his role are completely different from what Ogbonia brings. If you try to tell me that Ogbonia is the Osa replacement, I'm going to push back on that hard because it doesn't make sense from a skill set perspective. Now, could Ogbonia replace Solomon Thomas on the depth chart? That's a more reasonable conversation. Thomas is an interior player, Ogbonia is an interior player, and if the staff feels like Ogbonia gives them a younger, cheaper version of similar production, then yeah, that math works out. But Thomas isn't playing edge either, so even in that scenario, you're still left with a hole if Osa walks. And here's what nobody is really talking about right now. If Dallas does cut or trade Osa, the savings aren't even that significant. A trade would save them somewhere under $5 million in cap space. That's not nothing, but it's not transformative either. So you'd be giving up a player who at least has starting caliber potential to save a relatively modest amount of money, and then you'd still need to go find another starting caliber defensive lineman to fill that void. The one name that keeps coming up in those conversations is Keandre Faulk. And I'll be honest with you, he makes a lot of sense for what Dallas needs, even though he's not the sexiest addition in the world. But that's a whole separate breakdown that we'll get into if and when the Osa domino actually falls. Let me bring this back to the big picture because I think that's what's really eating at Cowboys fans right now, and I feel it too. Day 2 of free agency, and the Cowboys have added PJ Locke at safety for reportedly around $5 million, Sam Williams as a re-signing, and now Otito Ogbonia at defensive tackle for around $3 million. Every single one of those moves is a depth addition. Every single one. There is not a single signing so far that makes you sit up in your chair and say, okay, Dallas is serious about competing at a higher level next season. And the elephant in the room, the thing that is driving everybody absolutely crazy, is the linebacker position. Where is the linebacker? Seriously, where is he? Because right now the Cowboys are looking at Shaquille Leonard, who hasn't been the same player in years, DeMarvion Overshone, who has potential but is still developing, and Justin Barron, who is a depth piece at best. That is not a linebacker core that scares anybody. That is not a group that can hold up against the running games and the tight end heavy offenses in the NFC East, let alone across the conference. And when you look at the money spent on these depth signings and you add it all up, the combined total for Locke, Ogbonia, and whatever Williams got could have been redirected toward a legitimate starting linebacker. That's what's so frustrating. Each individual move in isolation is fine. Ogbonia for $3 million as a rotational interior lineman? Sure, that's a reasonable price for a reasonable role player. Nobody's going to lose sleep over that contract. But when you step back and look at the full picture, and you see depth piece after depth piece being added while a glaring hole at linebacker remains completely unaddressed, that's when the frustration boils over, and rightfully so. You cannot go into the draft with that linebacker room. You just can't. And yeah, maybe the plan is to draft a linebacker on day 2 or day 3, but relying entirely on the draft to fix your most obvious roster weakness is risky business, especially when there were options available in free agency that could have at least given you a bridge solution. So where does this leave us? The Cowboys' defensive line is deep. I'll give them that. You've got Quinnen Williams and Osa, assuming both are still here, Kenny Clark, Solomon Thomas, Ogbonia, and Toya. That's 6 guys who were on NFL rosters last year. That's solid depth for a rotation, even if the top-end talent is what you're really counting on. The run defense up front should be improved just by sheer volume of bodies who can rotate in and stay fresh. But the pass rush from the interior is still a question mark because none of these depth additions bring that element, and the second level of the defense is a problem that hasn't been touched. I want to give this front office the benefit of the doubt. I want to believe there's a master plan here, and that all these small moves are setting the table for something bigger. Maybe a trade, maybe a draft day move up, maybe a signing we don't see coming. But right now, in this moment, the vibes are not great. The energy around this team's free agency feels like a franchise that's trying to get by on the margins instead of making the kind of bold move that shifts the trajectory. And look, I get it. The cap situation is brutal. Years of kicking the can down the road have caught up, and there's only so much you can do when you're working with limited space. But that's exactly why the moves you do make have to count. And spending $8 million combined on a safety backup and a rotational defensive tackle, when your linebacker room is basically empty, feels like misplaced priorities. Now I could be wrong. Maybe Ogbonia comes in and surprises everybody. Maybe he's one of those guys who just needed the right system and the right coaching to unlock something we haven't seen yet. The athleticism is there based on his track and field background, the size is there, and sometimes a change of scenery does wonders for a player's development. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know exactly how this plays out because nobody does. But based on everything we know right now, this is a depth signing, and it should be evaluated as one. Not a game changer, not a needle mover, just a solid addition to a rotation that needed bodies after cutting Winfrey. And if that's all it is, then fine. Just go fix the linebacker spot next. That's the message from Cowboys Nation right now, and I hope the front office is listening. So what do you think? Is this the kind of move that makes sense for where the Cowboys are right now? Or are you fed up with seeing depth signings while the real problems go unsolved? Drop your take in the comments because I want to hear from you. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on now. You made it this far. You clearly care about this team as much as I do, so hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you on the next one because trust me, with how fast things are moving right now, you do not want to miss what comes next.